Today, I want to talk about a very tense and evolving situation: the recent airstrikes in Gaza following Hamas's partial acceptance of Donald Trump's ultimatum. It's a moment that seems to combine diplomacy, coercion, military force, and humanitarian crisis all in one. I'll walk you through what's going on, unpack the key claims and counterclaims, and try to make sense of where this might go next. Over the past few days, Trump issued a sweeping 20-point proposal for Gaza, demanding a ceasefire, release of hostages, disarmament, and international oversight of Gaza's governance, among other things. He gave Hamas a deadline: accept or face all hell, a phrase he used publicly. Hamas then responded by saying it accepted parts of the plan, particularly those relating to the ceasefire, the administration of Gaza by an independent body, and the release of hostages, both living and remains. But it balked at full disarmament and some structural elements. In theory, once Hamas made that partial acceptance, Israel was supposed to stop bombing Gaza, or at least reduce its offensive operations. Trump called on Israel to immediately halt its bombing in view of the development. Israeli leaders responded by saying they were ready to begin implementing the first stage of Trump's plan. But the reality on the ground has been messier. Despite calls for a halt, airstrikes and shelling have continued in Gaza. The Gaza Civil Defense Agency reported dozens of airstrikes and artillery attacks even after Trump's demand to stop. Several areas, notably Gaza City and Al-Mawasi, saw strikes on homes, tents housing displaced people, and civilian infrastructure. Hospitals reported casualties from these strikes, including children. There are a few things to watch for and question in all this. Let me break them down. First, intent vs. capability. Even if Israel's political leadership orders a reduction or halt in offensive operations, military campaigns are complex. Weapons systems, command chains, momentum, and decisions at various levels can delay or muddy compliance. Whether the strikes are deliberate defiance or simply rogue actions is not clear yet. Second, trust and verification. Hamas accepted parts of the proposal, but refused to accept disarmament in full. That's a sticking point. Israel's demands include full disarmament. Israel and its supporters may worry that Hamas might use this partial acceptance to regroup or stall. So even if Hamas says yes in part, Israel will be cautious. Third, the humanitarian cost. For the average Gazan, the distinction between partial ceasefire and continued bombings is irrelevant. The damage, destruction, fear, displacement, food shortages, lack of medical supplies, these continue to pile up. Gaza's health system is under catastrophic strain. Each aerial strike risks further casualties, destruction of homes, and eroding any trust Hamas or others might place in ceasefire promises. Fourth, political dynamics inside Israel. Netanyahu's government includes hardline ministers who oppose any deal that constrains military freedom. Even if Netanyahu agrees to implement a plan, internal dissent could lead to backsliding or sabotage. Observers have noted this risk. Fifth, regional and international pressure. Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and other actors are pressing Hamas to accept and pressuring Israel to show restraint. The UN and rights groups see this as perhaps a rare window to pause the violence. If actors act in good faith, let me present a possible scenario of what might happen next, assuming all parties act opportunistically. If Hamas and mediators quickly sit down to negotiate the terms it had reservations about, especially governance, structure, and disarmament, they might reach a more refined agreement that keeps the ceasefire intact. Israel then might further reduce attacks or hold off on large offensives, allowing humanitarian corridors, reconstruction, and more hostages to be released. That's the optimistic path. On the other hand, if either side perceives that their rival is stalling, the ceasefire could collapse. Israel might resume heavy bombardment, claiming that it is defending itself against renewed rocket attacks or Hamas maneuvering. Hamas might revert to attacks if it feels threatened or sees the ceasefire as unfair or one-sided. In such a collapse, the most vulnerable, civilians in Gaza, would suffer even more. There's also the wild card of radical or rogue groups. Even if Hamas commits to a deal, smaller factions or offshoots might continue attacks, which Israel could use as pretext to resume or intensify operations. That kind of fragmentation complicates any ceasefire. Another key issue is monitoring and enforcement. Who would monitor compliance? Where would observers be stationed? Which party has to allow inspections? Given distrust, any monitoring system must be robust, impartial, and accepted by all sides. Without that, accusations of violations will fly, and the ceasefire will be shaky. In terms of public perception and media, both sides want to portray themselves as the restrained party. Hamas can point to the continued bombings to argue Israel is violating the spirit of the agreement. Israel can point to Hamas's reluctance to disarm as showing bad faith. Each narrative will influence internal politics, global diplomacy, and public opinion. Now, here are a few questions I believe are especially important. Will Israel actually cease bombardment, or just reduce overt offensives while retaining the capability to strike quickly? Will Hamas agree to disarm in a meaningful sense, or preserve underground capabilities covertly? How many hostages remain, and could further releases build enough trust to sustain the ceasefire? Will regional actors like Egypt, Qatar push hard enough to enforce compliance, or will they allow backsliding? Will the Humanitarian Crisis force rapid concessions from either side before full negotiations conclude? For the average viewer or reader, the heart of this story is, a people in Gaza, already suffering, may get a momentary pause, or not. The sanctity of promises will be tested. The credibility of international diplomacy is at stake. The innocent will likely continue to bear the brunt. In summary, this is a high-stakes moment. Hamas partially accepted Trump's plan, provoking calls for Israel to stop bombing. Yet the airstrikes have not ceased. The next days will test whether this is a genuine turning point or another fragile pause before escalation. The conditions set now will determine whether Gaza sees a real relief or more destruction. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. Do you believe this partial acceptance might hold, or is it just another pause before the storm?